PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi. Here's my report on the last round of the Sinquefield Cup 2024. I'm going to dip into a few of the games to give you a kind of complete picture of what was going on in the tournament. Starting with Alireza Firouzja, who had white against Pragnananda. Remember, Firouzja a point clear going into this last round. So he just needed a draw to secure tournament victory. Now Prag obviously was spoiling for a fight because he's playing the French and the classical variation, inviting white to play, for example, e5, and then we have a closed position which can be very tense. But no, Firouzja didn't want that. Bishop g5, bring a piece out, and now, after bishop e7, e5, we get more exchanges. That's what Firouzja wants. It's an easier position to negotiate than 4e5 straight away. But Prag is spoiling for a fight. He wants a tense position. So this is the so-called McCutcheon variation, inviting white to push on again. And after this is mainline position. Again, this is a really tense fight, where often white will be attacking on the king side and black will attack on the queen side. But no, Firouzja doesn't want that. He wants to keep the ball on the floor. He doesn't want to have such complications. He exchanged on d5 and then knight f3. So he's just bringing his pieces out in a very orderly way. But this just isn't doesn't present any difficulties for black at all. If anything, I would say white has to be a little bit careful here because of the damaged pawn structure. Queen is certainly not badly placed in the middle of the board, and the bishop is coming to the long diagonal very easily. So this is how the game went. Okay, threat bishop e4, but queen d6. Queen e3. Okay, Firouzja is getting ready to perhaps throw a knight into e5. So that was exchanged off, and castles. Now, again, I've spoken about this slightly damaged pawn. So black is ready to play c5 to put some pressure here. And white has to be a little bit careful. Yes, the bishop is very well placed looking at the king side, but white doesn't have enough pieces to attack properly. So how do you manage this position with white? Firouzja played a4. Excellent move. So he needs to exchange pawns. So after c5, this typical move to attack in the middle, a5. Very good. So this means he can simplify pawns. And after this, an exchange. Okay, so he's created a little weakness on b6. Queen g3, excellent move. He wants to exchange pieces. I say an excellent move. An excellent move if you want to play for a draw, basically. And that's what he wants to do. And position simplified like this. Rook takes and rook takes pawn. So, well, they played until move 47, another 25 moves. But I think it's pretty clear this position is going to end in a draw. Too many pawns have been exchanged off. I would say it's slightly better for black because of these compact pawns, but yeah, easy to draw. So Alireza Firouzja draws the game, and he became the winner of the Sinquefield Cup 2024. Well, more on that in a second. Okay, let's move on. So the player in second place going into the round, Fabiano Caruana, well, obviously he had to try for a win in this game. Now he's playing Giri, a very solid player, but not having the best of tournaments. Now Giri is offering a Catalan, so Caruana can play d4 and they can go into a Catalan. No doubt Giri has these lines very well worked out with black, but Caruana just plays d3. And I think this is clever because it gets Giri away from his homework. He's very well prepared. He has to think for himself to a certain extent. So knight e5. Of course, this is... I mean, it's a slight compromise for white playing in this way. But it can still be quite tricky. In fact, Giri has faced this once before. He had this against Yu Yangyi this year. And the game went like this. So immediately, this is slightly complicated. So it looks like Caruana has done his homework and had studied that game. Giri played something different. After 2.5 minutes thought, he played knight d7. Caruana exchanged off and played e4. Already I prefer white's position. Nice gain of space with e4. You want to push on and just get this nice kingside pawn wedge, basically. Giri exchanged and played bishop c6, queen e2. White is still angling for e5. And of course, if black plays e5, then that knight will appear on d5. So knight d7, f4. That's a4, let's shut down counterplay. Bishop f6, well, that provokes e5. I mean, I'm not sure this was the best idea, really, because I think Caruana wants to play like this anyway. An exchange of bishops, and the bishop came back. I think Caruana could be very happy with the outcome of this opening. Because in this position, white has two plans. One plan is to play, let's say, bishop c3, rook to the d-file, and play knight d6, giving a very nice positional advantage using the space, this beautiful knight on d6. And the other plan is to play, well, bishop c3 again, and then to organise g4 and f5 to attack on the king side. Beautiful space advantage. So that's why Giri, after a big think, he thought for almost 20 minutes and lashed out with f5. But this, okay, it does free black to a certain extent, but it also damages the pawn structure. And this is still very pleasant for white. So after f5, well, I mean, white could just go knight g5 here, but this is a very neat move, actually. Rook d1. Very clever. So pawn takes, queen g4 check, leads to mate, queen g7 next move. And queen takes, well, an exchange of queens, and then rook takes knight. So rook d1 is a very nice move. Knight b6 played. Knight d2. So an exchange of queens. But white is still definitely better in this position. So that just covers d3 and makes room for the knight to come here. So why is white better? Well, this is a superb piece on c3. Structurally, this isn't great for black. This is potentially a weak pawn. White's pawns are simply better than black's here. And this is slightly awkward. This knight is going to be pushed. Rook d6, a5. Let's push the knight back. Now, white could just play knight f3 here, but Caruana came up with a very interesting move, knight e4. There's a little bit of flash there. So why can't that be taken? Okay, well, after this, an exchange, and rook d1 recovers the piece, and that leaves white with a winning position because the king will just step up to take the pawn up. So after knight e4, Giri exchanged. So the knight is threatened. Pawn takes knight, rook takes knight. rook here and knight d6. There we are. And this is uncomfortable for black. Threatening this one. I mean, if that's taken off, this also still very uncomfortable with this pin. Looks really nasty. Let's go back. So Giri played knight f6. But Caruana eagerly chopped that off and took on b7. And basically he's a pawn up there, and yeah, he converted very smoothly actually by creating a passed pawn like this. And well, this is basically a winning position. So yeah, smooth victory from Caruana, and Giri struggling in this tournament. Not had his best tournament at all, but that victory brought Fabiano Caruana into clear second place behind Firouzja, just a half point behind. Right, now, what was going on with our world title contenders? So let's have a look at Ding. So up to this point, he'd drawn all his games and lost one. Could Ding at least reach 50% by winning his last round game? Now, he had black against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, and it was a Spanish. Would you believe we reach a position which is of great interest to me, at least, because once again we have this idea with bishop g5. So once this bishop is locked outside the pawn chain and can't come back to e7, then this pin is aggravating for black. But it raises the stakes because it provokes this advance g5. I mean, to break, at some moment black is going to have to break this pin, and g5 is the way to do it. So let's see how this developed. So this is the favourite strategy of mine, playing with bishop g5. I've used it throughout my career, but many players have played like this as well. Most notably Magnus Carlsen, the #1 in the world. So let's have a look. Now, everything, well, I was going to say pretty standard so far, but playing c5, Ding is gaining space in the centre. That's certainly not a bad idea, and c4 can come later on. So finally g5 is provoked, and knight h5. Now, Ding has had exactly this position before in the Candidates Tournament 2022, where he had black against Richard Rapport. Rapport played with a3 here, and Ding played this little maneuver with the rook, so that the rook, well, it came in fact to c7 and could be used on the c file. It also protects f7. That could be useful sometimes. But Maxime Vachier-Lagrave played in a different way with white. I'm going to give you a chance to think of a strategy with white. So time for me to have a drink, time for you to have a think. White to play. Can you think of a strategy for white? And bear in mind the previous games that we've looked at on the channel featuring this pawn structure with the pawns like this and the white's pawn on e4. What is white's aim here? Okay. Well, I'm always hammering on about the weakness of the f5 square. And ideally, white would like to bring a knight to e3 to cover that square. Also looks at the d5 square too. So bringing a knight to e3 is what I would like to do here, and that's what Maxime started, had this in mind with h3. It's a useful move for another reason as well. You could also play rook e1. with the idea of knight f1 to e3. I mean, that's kind of the traditional method. There is a problem with that. And that after this, actually, black is getting serious play on the king side. Likewise, f takes, h5, and there isn't time to stop this, basically. If h3, then g4 will open lines. That's a problem. I'll show you something similar in the game, but there's a slight difference to this. Yeah, the problem is that after knight h4, then h3 is hanging. Bear that in mind. So h3 was the move. Okay, so why can't black play in a similar way? Why can't black go with h5 and break open with g4? Because of king h2, that guards this pawn. I mean, that's actually nice and safe. And after g4, knight h4, that's the difference. That the h3 pawn is now defended. I mean, obviously this is fantastic for white when the knight covers the f5 square and you can play on the f file. So that's the difference. h3, rook b8 played by Ding. So Ding going for exactly the same maneuver as his game against Rapport. Now, I mentioned the idea is to bring that knight round to e3. And that's what Maxime achieves with this knight maneuver. I mean, this is such a complex position. You know, you're provoking h5, which Ding played. And white has to work out in these kind of positions, you know, can black make a breakthrough here? Well, after h4, in fact, bishop h2 is safe. You know, these squares are covered. And g4 was played by Ding. But actually, h4 just closes things. But the crucial thing is that knight has got to this beautiful square on e3. I mean, it's possible that black should simply wait here and just keep options open. King f8 to g7 is not so silly. Anyway, Ding played g4 before I confuse you even more. Oh, I beg your pardon. g4, h4. And knight g6. Well, that's why Ding has gone for this. Because he spied that that pawn is loose. But Maxime had obviously anticipated this and very quickly played queen e1. And here Ding went with king f8 after 16 minutes thought. I think he had underestimated this move, queen e1. So why not knight takes pawn? Well, then white will play f4, threatening the knight. Now, there's lots of ways that black can play this, but basically if the knight moves back, then white strikes out. And then bishop h4, and let's say knight d5. And this is very uncomfortable for black. But you can see that this bishop, yes, black is a pawn up, but that bishop just blockades. That bishop cannot be shifted. There's permanent pressure here. And then white will try to effect a breakthrough on the queen side. But yeah, when black is permanently tied to defending that pawn, it's really unpleasant. Superb compensation for white. A lovely pawn wedge there, which really restricts black's pieces, not just the knight, but the bishop as well. This is a really tricky position. So queen e1 played, beautiful move, very subtle. King f8 and f3. So now Maxime breaks open the f-file and it's clear that the initiative is now with white. So c4, that was taken. So Ding is trying to find counterplay. And, well, or just getting rid of that dangerous knight on e3 that has so much potential. But white's position is simply better than black's here. It's just so much easier to play for white. And yes, one of my favourite themes, black's rooks are split. White's rooks are connected. So white is just so much better coordinated than black. And it's possible, well, possible to attack on the F file. It might be that there's an attack on the D file. It might be that white is playing on the queen side. But for black, well, where is black playing here? This is not an easy position at all. So there was an exchange here. And, well, it's possible to take that pawn on h4. But white is still better in the endgame. I mean, maybe this is black's best policy to try and hold this endgame. But you can see it's still pretty unpleasant for black when this rook is so active and there is potential later on to use that queenside pawn majority. But bishop g4 played by Ding, queen f2, so that guards the pawn and also looks down that diagonal, which is could be very interesting. a4. I think black's basic problem here is in this position, there's no active plan. Bishop d1, excellent move. So let's get rid of that bishop, which just kind of, locks everything together on the king side. But once that bishop is exchanged, so for example, if black were to exchange here, you can see there's play on the f file, there's play on the d file, that h5 pawn is weak. It's not a good position. But rook d7 played. Now white doesn't need to exchange straight away, but a5. Nice move, because at any moment, well, if that pawn disappears, then the a pawn looks good. Maybe white can go for this. There's also this possibility to play bishop a4. Again, it's possible for black to exchange, but black is so passive here. It's a horrible position. But Ding throws the knight into f4 and allows Maxime to just grab an exchange. And yes, it looks like a beautiful octopus knight. But actually, it's not doing a lot here. And the exchange was taken. Pawn was taken. I mean, it's obviously really serious. The rook just locks itself into f5. And then king h2 defends the bishop. And then rook g5. That was the final move of the game. Yeah, just exchanging off that rook, so there's no real pressure on white's king. And at the other end of the board, this pawn is going to be too strong. Black simply doesn't have enough play here. So, for example, if d4, you can exchange, and queen b6, and white's pawn gets there, basically. This one is covered. It's pretty simple. So Ding resigned after rook g5. Very disappointing final game for Ding. He drew 7 games and lost 2 in the tournament. And he just looks a bit brittle, I have to say. Okay, let me show you what happened with final one with Gukesh. Just the end of the game. So Gukesh playing white. He's a pawn up. He's playing Wesley So. But Wesley has it under control. He's a solid man. Okay. I'm going to give you a question again. Black to play. How did Wesley just kind of keep things under control in this position? Even though he's a pawn down, it's still fine for black. How is it fine for black? Of course, Gukesh would happily play on pawn up, but Wesley found something here. Bishop takes a2. Very neat sacrifice to just kill the game off, actually. So this one has to be captured. Can't can't be defended sensibly. Well, it can be defended with the king, but anyway, that it's still a draw. So anyway, rook takes, queen takes, and now it's just a draw by perpetual check. So if the king steps up to f2, in fact, the king cannot escape. You can see it just gets checked around, etc. That's just a perpetual. And king e1, again, it's just a perpetual check. And eventually they repeated. And yeah, draw. Very neat finish by Wesley. He's a solid man, but he's tactically very sharp, of course. In the final game, Nepo collapsed against Abdusattorov. Another Nepo collapse, basically. Okay, let's look at the final standings. So Alireza Firouzja on 6, and he's a half point clear of Caruana. So that means that with that victory, Firouzja bounces back in the live rating list. So he's now number 5 in the world. He gained 15 points winning the tournament. So yeah, he's on excellent form at the moment. You know, we know what an excellent blitz and rapid player he is, particularly blitz. But he's dipped in classical chess over the past year. So that's a big bounce back for Firouzja. Caruana, yeah, he gains a few rating points. That's nice for him. So he maintains his position 3rd in the world on the live rating list and getting closer to Nakamura, but not closer to Carlsen, who's still way out there. What about the others? Well, yeah, let's talk about Gukesh and Ding. Well, Gukesh drew all his games. I thought he showed grit in holding some difficult positions and was pretty solid. I mean, I don't think he didn't set the world on fire, but he was very responsible. Very tough. Obviously, no one beat him. Very tough to beat. He survived some difficult positions and played well, I think. Ding, disappointing. He seems brittle to me. He failed to convert promising positions and lost 2 games. So he is still struggling. Is he better than his previous tournaments this year? Well, maybe a bit. But there are still big questions. And I think, well, let's see what happens. But I do hope he puts up a good fight in the World Championship match in November. Right, I think I'll leave it there. Thanks for following the channel during this tournament. If you're not a subscriber, click that subscribe button. Plenty more videos coming your way. Thanks for watching.